It's all about pleasure.
Let's do this.
So, as I was saying, this has been a long time since our last podcast. This is our second. And I think we've had many discussions, you and I, in between. But it was important for us to sort of bring this into a podcast so we can share this with people around us. So what do you think?
That's it. So you were saying that maybe it's a shame that we have to talk about pleasure in this century, no?
No.
We still have to discuss about pleasure.
I think it's a shame because we, as a society, are losing our ability to experience and provide pleasure all along. I saw a really interesting documentary not long ago that looked at the impact of social media into the ability of individuals to experience personal pleasure and personal contact with people around them. The idea was that we spend too much time on the phones, and maybe one of the reasons why I don't have a phone, I only have a computer,
and you don't have
forget
Instagram.
About what pleasure is about.
Yes, because in the phone, I'm going to show you. When you are in the phone, if I'm alone, I'm going to do this. I'm going to show you. This is an automatic thing that we do when we are in a phone. I'm going to get a social media and I'm going to click Instagram. And then I'm going to scroll in Instagram. And my brain, it's just like it's getting an automatic exercise, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Most of the time, I'm not reading the things that I'm seeing, you know? Then I find something interesting. I'm going to listening. And then it's okay for me to talk about this because I do this and most of the people do this. And it's really a problem because when I'm doing this, I'm not seeing a movie that I like. I'm not walking in the nature. I'm not swimming in the sea. I'm not making love. I'm not reading a book that I like. So what we are doing with our time, it's something that is very important to reflect. It's also something that I ask most of the time in the art psychotherapy sessions. I ask people, what do you do in your free time? What do you do for pleasure? And most of people answer me, pleasure, because they associate pleasure with sex, you know?
Yes.
I know in Portugal, it's like this. Maybe it's a cultural thing, but I'm reading a lot about that. And I'm starting to think that it's not only in Portugal, it's also in other societies that pleasure is mixed with the thoughts of all that has to do with sex. And pleasure is not only sex.
It's interesting because even going back to just the influence of social media, which I think is really, really important to our topic, it's a basic process of classical conditioning. I mean, how primitive can we get? This is basically a Pavlovian process that we salivate whenever social media plays or rings the bell. And social media rings the bell all the time. I saw a cartoon the other day that I thought was really, really interesting. There's the cartoon of two people having sex, and both of them are on the phone.
I saw that.
They're
also
looking at the phone as they're having sex, which then begs the question, where's the pleasure in that process? Is it the phone, or is it the sexual act that brings pleasure to the individual?
And also a thing about presence and about your attention. Because if you are in a phone, You are not in the present moment of the thing that you are doing. You know, I saw also a very terrific cartoon that was two persons hugging themselves, but they were like this. You know, they were
Yes.
seeing the like no, okay, you understand? They were seeing both iPhones. You know, so
It's
it's the
interesting
same. It's the
because
same
when you
idea.
really think about it, pleasure, what we call pleasure, it's part of a neural process. That's all it is. Neurology. There's the neurology of the process itself.
Mm-hmm.
They talk very much about the ventral striatum, which is the VC-VS process that brings us pleasure in all capabilities, in all modes of pleasure, anything from the taste of a pastéis de nata, right, to
Yes.
orgasm. It all takes
Yes.
place in that little part of the brain, right here in the central part of the brain. And we quite often don't understand that process can be influenced by so many things.
Mm-hmm.
And that pleasure, like you suggested, is not just about sex, although sex can be really pleasurable. But just the basic concept of looking at the ocean. I looked at some of the pictures that you've posted with beautiful sunset by the ocean on the beach. And I can imagine the pleasure that I would experience if I was there, just by
Yeah.
visually participating in that process. And one of the suggestions that from some of my friends that are heavily involved in psychotherapy is the idea that we can no longer experience pleasure outside of our immediate realm, meaning that our sense of pleasure now brings about anxiety, it brings about neuroticism, it brings about what we call debilitating mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, the process of therapy is to recoup all of that, to allow the individual to become an individual again and not become a slave of the social media, which I think we are. Like I find in terms of art therapy that brings a whole different dimension that people are not used to. Like, for instance, how many people go to a museum and spend hours in a museum looking at the paintings and admiring the painting in itself, the work of the artist, and the subject of the artist? If you suggest that to someone, especially younger people, they'll look at you and say, "Are you crazy? Why would I do that?" You
Yeah,
know?
and now you have online visits in the
Yeah.
museums. So I think that is I don't like to call it a problem, but maybe it's starting to be a problem because you don't experience things in presence. You know, it's like you are if you want to go to Louvre Museum in Paris, you can go in your computer.
Mm-hmm.
And you spend the time looking for the paintings and admiring the paintings, but I feel that is not the same experience that if I looking for Mona Lisa in the same room that the painting it is, you know, it has to be a different experience, pleasure experience. It's not the same because in my computer gives me the also the sense how do you say sensibilidade. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Gives you the sense. It's the sense of that you can get anything in your computer and in your social media. You know, because you can look to Louvre and you can go to Madrid to another museum. You know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe that is the same experience that if I'm going to Madrid to visit the museum, you know. I prefer to go to Madrid and to have all the experience of the travel, to meet new people, to go in another culture, to sit in Esplanada,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
and to see
Outside
the
and
people
watching
in the
it.
street and to feel the street, you know. So I think that pleasure has to do also with feelings and with what are you feeling right now. And that is something that most of the most young persons that I have in psychotherapy, it's the problem of feelings that is there. It's because they don't know how to feel, and if they feel anger, they feel that it's not a good thing. So they go to psychotherapy because they are feeling anger. Anger is it's a feeling like happiness, you
It's a
know.
symptom of something that is so much deeper into the psyche of humans.
Mm-hmm.
I have a good friend of mine. He's a psychotherapist, full time, and we were talking about concepts um, of mental health. That was the basic thing. What's mental health? And he said to me something which I found sort of surprising. He says, "You know what? I ask my patients now. I say to them, what makes you happy?" And he said, the younger patients look at me like I've got three heads. They go, what do you mean happy? He says, what makes you happy? What do you do that makes you happy? Or what would you like to do that would make you happy? And he says, most people can't relate to that concept of what is happiness. Yet people talk about happiness all the time. People look, oh, I'm not happy. I don't like this and I don't like that. And the old process of therapy was to say, if I can sort of name now Alice, one of my favorite therapists of all time, how would you change it? How would you
Mm-hmm.
change it? And nowadays, if you ask people, how would you change it? They have no clue.
Yeah.
And so that ties in specifically, it's directly related to the concept of pleasure. What brings you pleasure? Because if you look, as I know you do, as very much as I do, at Facebook, which to me, it's the great laboratory. As a psychologist, Facebook is the great laboratory because you can actually experience everything there. You can see it happening in front of you. Most people tend to long for happiness. They tend to long for pleasure, but they don't know how to explain it. All they know now is the negative part of things. Everything on Facebook, for the most part, is negative.
Yeah. Yeah.
People complaining about this, people complaining about that. And I know when you look at the therapeutical process, which has to be very much controlled by the patient itself or the client, whatever you want to call it, we as psychotherapists can only guide them. We
Yes,
can't make them happy.
it's
We
like
can't bring
in our
pleasure to them.
and
We can
sometimes
help them explore that part of things. But, so I think that, the more we talk about this, the more I realized that how important the concept of pleasure really is. I mean, how many people smile? You smile all the time. I don't.
yes.
People often say to me, "You don't smile anymore," and I think about it and I say, maybe I don't, but I used to. So why is that I don't smile anymore? Because I am so concerned with the world around me, although I'm not tied into social media, but I am so impacted by everything that goes on around me that maybe somehow I don't feel pleasure in a lot of these things. And so you do self-reflection and you go, man, I got to really get to the point where I'm starting to enjoy things again. And I think that this is why our little podcast, call it what you like, our concern with pleasure, it's so important that we basically bring people into the discussion because people no longer discuss anything. You ever notice that? People complain and bitch about everything. Nobody discusses anything.
And what I feel right now is that in my group of friends, is that most of the people have closed ideas about things, and they are not it's not available, that you say in English. In Portuguese we say disponível, being
Available.
yeah, available to discuss something, to reflect, and maybe to get to the point. Sometimes happens to me. I have an idea about something, and I'm starting to discuss with a person about that idea, and I found another meanings. This is the essence of psychotherapy. You go to a session, you put something in your creation, art psychotherapy, you do art in your session, wherever it's a painting or a draw or something that you are going to invent to do, okay? And maybe in that session, you can get the lucky to discover something different about your own idea of something. And what I feel right now, it's most of the people, they are not interested in discuss things and to reflect about things. They are interested or to have the reason, or I don't want to discuss about that. I have this idea, so I'm going to live with this idea. This is so limited, How can you get pleasure in this? To have, maybe it's more people feel safety. I don't know about having this. You are a social psychology also. You can explain this. What is happening, because you have so many information, and I feel that we have many information, but we don't have knowledge.
And that's the point. Information
does
does not necessarily reflect knowledge. I can have tremendous amount of information about an engine, a car engine. It doesn't mean that I have knowledge about the engine, because I'm probably the worst mechanic ever.
Me too.
Now, a friend of mine invited me a few weeks ago to join a drum circle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a drum circle, basically, at a place actually for seniors, and especially seniors that have some anxiety problems. They're experiencing some depression and whatnot. So they have these drum circles, classes, if you like, where there's all kinds of drums. And because I'm a drummer, I was invited by this individual to basically come and participate. And what I found was something fascinating, because by participating and playing patterns on the drums, different styles of patterns, different ideas, people are encouraged to come up with their own pattern, everybody follows and whatnot. That I guess maybe for the first time in a long time, I saw people laughing, enjoying, closing their eyes, and feeling the vibration of the drums as they play it, singing, and was an absolutely amazing experience. So I thought to myself, well, gee, man, this is basic applied art therapy, isn't it? In the sense that people somehow left their own problems or their own concept of the world, and they became lost in this pleasurable activity of playing drums, which they're not drummers. But by the end of it, people connect. There's a connection that I think is fascinating. So I've been going every week, my friend that conducts the class, he says, well, you're a drummer, you know all these different rhythms and stuff, and you can bring in different ideas. And I said to him, I'm just going to go and join the people. I'm not teaching them anything. I'm just watching them enjoy getting immersed in this percussion process that sort of brings some meaning to them. We had 3 people last week that came from the psychiatric unit. They were older individuals, and it's interesting because they, at the outset, at the beginning, they wouldn't talk. They were very, very introverted, if you like. By the end of it, everybody was talking, everybody was drumming, everybody was joking, laughing, enjoying the whole process. Now, to me, And I thought of our little talk, and I thought, man, this is applied pleasure, isn't it? Nothing to do with sex. It has to do with the experiences of something.
And to experience
amazing.
Something that is very important, that I think it's a metaphor also, because you experience that when we have sex. It's the connection that you get, It's the connection that you are in that present moment doing something that is giving you pleasure, and you are with yourself, but you are also with other persons in the circle. And also because that kind of activity activates your primitive, it's like your primitive memories,
Your reptile brain kicks in, right?
Yeah,
and it takes over.
And you feel safe and even the introvert persons, they feeling safe because they don't have to talk about something. They just have to play the drums, and they are talking also. Because when you have a drum circle, it's like you improvise. So it's like you can have a smooth rhythm, but you can also have a strong rhythm. And you are talking all the time, but you are talking through the drums, not in verbal way, And that is also pleasurable. And that's also the thing that we already talk about it so much. It's because that's the reason, because I believe that the evolution in art psychotherapy has to do with pleasure. Even when you are working in your pain, because the way that you express that pain, it's pleasurable.
Also, the way we approach psychotherapy nowadays, and there's a lot of controversy associated with psychotherapy nowadays, and I'm talking about present. And by present, we go probably in the last 20 years or so. We have emphasized tremendously the idea of victim and victimology. When psychotherapy is meant to allow the individual to develop particular strategies to not be a victim.
It's empowerment. It's not about...
Absolutely. The empowerment is through the process of realizing that this happened to me, but this does not define me. I have to move on. So can you help me move on? That's the question that you ask the therapist, and the role of the therapist is to help you move on, not to get you stuck in the past and keep going back to what happened to you in the past. I find as sort of a newcomer, let's call it, to art therapy, which I started investigating about 10, 12 years ago through Rui, which started inviting me to all these conferences. The idea is that in the process of involvement in call it the art world, which encompasses all kinds of different things, it basically keeps pulling people away from this idea of victim. And keeps empowering them by allowing them to create, even create a new future, create a new present. And to a certain extent, even create a new past, if you like, putting the past in perspective. And I find this so fascinating. And nowadays we look at pleasure. When I tell people, says, well, I'm writing some articles on pleasure, and that's hedonism. And I'm going, no. Pleasure is not hedonism. Well, we can be, but that's not what we're talking about.
Not also,
And that it's so important that we do exactly that we empower people. We give people, in the old days, when I was teaching psychotherapy, I'll talk about give people new tools. It's like, now you have a garden, or you have a place where there's going to be a garden, which looks like a mess, but there's a whole bunch of tools here that I'm going to give you, and you're going to be able to go over there and start replanting and reforming the garden until it becomes beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's pulling you away from the idea of victim.
And also a very important thing about that process is that when you give the tools And when you show the tools, you also give the opportunity that the person can discover in self, inside their own tools. This is terrific, because that's something that I love in my profession, because each person, it's a different person. And when you facilitate the process, you are also, it's like a big laboratory, and the person, they have their tools. So let's discover, what are your tools. You can try it. Fail, it's okay. Try again, fail again, try again. It's okay. I'm here, so I'm going to support you. And that's also a very important thing about pleasure. It's support, Maybe the lack of pleasure has to do also with the lack of support that people have in life. Sometimes I have a lot of friends that I'm a mother also. I have a son, a little son. So I have a lot of friends saying to me, you are always putting pictures in the beach, and you travel a lot, and you do this and you do that. And you are always smiling, like you were saying. Yes. How do you do that? Oh, you do so many things. How can you do that? And I started to answer, I don't feel that I do so many things. I work, but I have my time also. I have my time with my kids, and I have also my time for me. This is so important. And that was something that I learned in my psychotherapy process, I learned with Dr. Rui that, because he was always asking me, what can you do to solve that? What can you do? What is in your hands? So to solve that. It's not what the other things or what you think or you imagine that you need that other persons do. No, it's something that has to do with you. So this is also that big you are responsible to get your power back.
It's funny, when I was trained in psychotherapy, and I wasn't trained in the psychodynamic percept. I was basically trained in psychotherapy generally as a whole, using many different approaches to it. One of the most important things was the emphasis on the fact that at the end of the day, you have to go home and be with yourself after you've been with many different patients with all kinds of problems. You cannot internalize the problems or bring them home to you. Mm-hmm. However, in the same vein, you also cannot impose on your patients your views on things, because you can't be telling them how to live their lives. You can only help them bring along, develop the tools, or give them the tools in certain cases to be able to live their lives according to the way they are and to maximize their efforts. I find it fascinating about art therapy, because it's a very non-threatening, not in your face kind of process, but it's a gradual process. You have people that can't draw. They can't draw a straight line. But basically the point is, it doesn't matter. The world's not about straight lines. There's a lot of crooked lines. There's a lot of curved lines. So you allow the person to explore that and become themselves. And that in itself, to me, develops a certain sense of pleasure that they have in creating whatever it is that they create. That's the pleasure part of it that I think it's so fascinating, and which I think is healing for them. Mm-hmm. We have to get away from this idea, oh, I'm sorry, oh, you're such a poor victim, oh, I'm so sorry this happened to you. You don't have to be sorry or not be sorry. Well, it didn't happen to you. You can't experience what they did. All you can do is to, you can show some empathy, but it's time to move on. Albert Ellis, as I said to you, one of my very favorite therapists of all time, had a concept which he called the masturbation of things. He says people think that they must do this and they must do that, and things, because these things happen to you a certain way, well, they must. And he says you got to get them out of that. They must nothing.
Yeah.
You know, that must thing, it says that you got to throw it in the garbage and move on and develop a new process of looking at the world and facing things. You should be able to look at your past and your past experiences, the really bad experience, and say, you know, that was terrible. Oh man, that was, you know, it made me feel really bad. But I'm glad that I'm over that I've moved forward. And I think that is so, so important. And people usually don't connect pleasure with this process. And then I often try to explain, well, that's a process of now finding pleasure in your new life, your new you, your new process of pushing and moving forward. Anyways, a lot of saying about pleasure, my dear.
Yes, I was thinking you were speaking, and I started to remember that it was 4 years ago. I was in a retreat in Bali, and I was saying very excited about all the things that were happening there. Bali is a tremendous, pleasurable island, so I was thinking, oh, I have this goal, that goal, that goal. And I was speaking with a friend of mine, and she was saying to me, so many things. For me, my goal is to have no goals. And I was like, I feel stuck in that time. I was like, and I was thinking, okay, maybe it's that thing that you were speaking to, I must this, I must that, I must.
Yeah.
And you were full of, how do you say tarefas in English? I don't know how to say that word. It's like you feel you fulfill your agenda with things that you must do. I must do this, I must do that.
Chores. You're talking about chores. It's like a chore.
Yeah. It's like
I have to wash the dishes because the dishes are there.
Oh my God.
I have to take out the garbage because the garbage is there. And when people feel obligation, I think it's a sense of obligation that really.
Also, the pleasure, it's also a process of liberation, you know? So I can decide to be in my sofa and I'm not going to do the dish. I don't want to. And it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's okay. Then there is going to be a moment that I'm going to do the dish, okay? So no problem. Also, this is a thing that I see in the clinic, you know, all the people that started the process, when they start the process of art psychotherapy, they are like a little bit heavy and they are the head full of things about I should do this or I should do that, and most of the process that I'm facilitating, I just only facilitate that the people get the courage to do things by themselves.
Yes.
And to do things like they are feeling. And that is also a pleasurable process, you know. Be yourself. It's okay. You can be yourself.
I think one of the presentations that I did at SPAT maybe a couple of years ago, can't remember exactly when it was, but I spoke about the as a therapist, that you derive great pleasure in seeing the advancement and the improvement in your patients. And when a patient no longer needs you because they've moved on, they now have the tools and they've used them, and you feel sort of a sense of accomplishment, which is pleasurable. You go, man, I feel that a lot with a lot of my students, for instance, that I have students now that were my students 12 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. They're still in touch, and they will refer back at some of the things we talked about, some of the experience we had, and they'll say, man, did I learn something from that? And I was able to move forth. And I think it's the same thing with patients. We feel exactly the same process in terms of how we relate to them, because the therapeutical relationship is a relationship you create with someone.
Yeah.
And you may be having that relationship with 20 people at a time, and they're all different. The same very much as I experienced with students. I had classes towards the end of my quote-unquote teaching career. My classes were small, 20, 25 students. But the connection and the relationship I had those students was really, really strong.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a teacher, my job was not to give them information, like we talked in the beginning, a lot of information. It's not a lot of knowledge, but it's how you use that knowledge. And the same applies to us as therapists. It's how we use the knowledge we have to empower the people that we are dealing with. And sometimes a lot of psychotherapists forget that they are not the rock star. This is not a stage. This is basically a process in which you are in the background facilitating something for somebody.
Backstage.
And that in itself creates a sense of happiness and a sense of pleasure when you finally can say, man, I got another one to
and the
on.
process, it's very interesting that you use the word stage. It's like in theater. So the process, it's all about to give the patient, it's not give, it's like create the possibility, the conditions, the ideal conditions, that they feel, okay, I'm going to get up in my life, in my stage,
Yeah.
and I'm going to be, this is my territory, so I'm going to be myself, and it's okay. And you are in the public or you are in the backstage applauding and saying, that's it, you are beautiful, you can do it. Because it's like it's so primitive also,
I mean, take something as simple as what happens on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
People look for likes. What's a like? Oh, somebody gave me a thumbs up, or somebody gave me a smile, they gave me a like. So we are always looking for validation.
Yeah.
And then we forget that the only validation we need is our own validation. Because if your life depends on validation from others, you are going to have a real miserable life. You are never going to be able to develop a sense of pleasure in what you do because you always need approval. And this is perhaps one of the biggest problems with society nowadays is this constant quest for approval. Am I too fat? Am I too thin? I mean, think of all the filters that we have now on social media. Why? Why do we need the filter? It's okay to joke around. I mean, you can put on a clown face if you like, but that's situational. It happened here. Everybody dresses up for carnival or whatever. But now it's like carnival is 365 days a week. We need approval from everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to get off of that. We have to allow people to have pleasure in themselves and be who they are. You're always going to have people that like you. You're always going to have people that don't like you. You're going to have people that really don't care one way or the other about you. And that's okay. Life. Welcome to the world.
Yeah, welcome to life. Yeah. I say a lot that in the clinic. Welcome to life. Welcome to the world. It's okay.
Yeah, and I think the pursuit of pleasure is really, really important. Of course, you can go overboard and become addicted to pleasure.
Yeah, that's also
to a certain extent.
That's a great discussion for the next episode. addictions.
Yes,
to pleasure.
because I think that there is something interesting attached to that.
Mhm.
And since we're coming to the end of our new episode, our second, hey,
Yeah.
we're doing well here. Let's hear for pleasure, because I think it's important that we all experience pleasure at some level. And it's just not sex, for as much as I love sex. Totally.
I think we all do. I think we all do.
there are other pleasures in life that's worth living for.
Yes, they are.
So I guess we can say goodbye to everybody and maybe see you again in 6 weeks, 3 weeks. I don't know.
Yeah.
Whenever we get there.
Bye.